That's the audience line, right?
So I'm going to leave that. Oh, hello. Hello, panel. How are you doing? Woo! Hello, audience. How are you doing? Hey! Jesus, they're more lively than you. I think we'll swap places and let them do a bit of speaking. These are all very nervous. As you know, they're unaccustomed to speaking in front of a big crowd like this, particularly during this economy. You're all very welcome to Talkin' Funny, which is a symposium on audience development in the live comedy sector. Not to be confused with Funny Talking, which is a symposium about speech defects. Any of you who are here for speech defects can hear me say some tongue twisters after the show. I'm saying show, it's not a show. Let's be honest, this is not a show, folks. Even though I'm encouraged by the fact that there's actually technically 4 or 5 rows of people now. We could actually, what say we scrap it all and just do a gig? Yeah, who's with me? There's no shortage of comedians. That's brilliant. Well, you're all very welcome. But for tonight, at any rate, it's going to be some funny people. We have some guest speakers here who are going to talk a little bit about some of the themes, and we're going to have some serious conversations around some funny stuff. I'm going to do my best to crack on and not eat into the time. Last time I stood in front of a bunch of people and pretended to be serious, 2 people got married. So good luck, front row. Tonight could be your night, is all I'm saying. Just without further ado, I'd like to welcome the panel. We have Kat Horan over here on the left. Petra Sheehan. Chris O Neill. Colin McGlinchey. And Mr. Robbie Bonham at the end here. And big round of applause for John Jetty, who's decided to record the events for tonight. I should mention, your calls may be recorded for training purposes. There's talk of a follow-up podcast and that kind of thing. It's all magic, as far as I'm concerned, and witchcraft, and they'll be burnt at the crossroads for it. But be aware that you may be recorded. That's pretty much all I have for you. Right now, I'd like to introduce our first speaker tonight, and he's going to talk on the subject of It's the Economy, Stupid, Finding an Audience in the Recession. Ladies and gentlemen, a big warm welcome for Robbie Bonham.
Thank you. Just working. Hello. Oh, I don't have to be funny. It's fucking great. The thing is, it's the economy. I didn't write the title for this, just let you know. It's the economy, stupid. Blaming the recession for the lack of audience. See, it's because that's the main struggle a lot of us are having. There just doesn't seem to be audiences. I mean, obviously, there's audiences somewhere if they're still filling up the Ivy Gardens or the Laughter Lounge or what have you. But as regards, the history, as far as I know, the history of audience, if you like, in this kind of end of the comedy scene is, from what I can remember, it used to be quite busy 10 years ago. And the first time there was a noticeable dip in Dublin audiences would have been around when the smoking ban came in. Because a lot of people just stopped going out for a while. They couldn't cope with not being able to smoke in a pub. And it was quite quiet then. And but it picked up again after, I don't know, probably a year. But certainly now, since this whole recession thing, and this kind of started, I suppose, would I be right, around mid-2010? Is kind of when things started to go quite quiet. And it was, there's not really a lot you can do about the recession itself. There's no recession committee we can go to and go, could you just, bring it down a notch? I really don't know if there's audiences out there. That there doesn't seem to be the same culture that there was around Dublin stand-up comedy. I remember even back in about 06, 07, there'd be quite a culture about, I was only doing comedy a couple of years. I've never been anybody with a profile, but back in 07, 06, I would get recognised by people regularly that had seen me in some club. Haven't had that in about 4 years. It's just because I don't know if the lower, because we're kind of the lower to middle rung of comedy essentially, there doesn't seem to be that many people even aware that there's comedy out there. I don't know what the difference. The recession is one thing. I actually think that social media has a lot to do with it. Sure, you can use social media to advertise yourself, but I think the problem with social media is that somebody goes to a club and sees a comedian, they can just friend them on Facebook or start chatting to them on Twitter. There ceases to be that performer-audience divide. Nobody's going to be bothered going to see it again when they know they can have a laugh with you, on the internet or whatever. I think in that capacity, a lot of social media has had a lot to do with an audience drop in conjunction with the recession. So I think because there's less audience, there's less of a potential audience to spread around all the comedy clubs. So consequently, it would be pointless on a quiet night, like a Monday or a Tuesday, to try and run, say, 3 nights and 3 different gigs in Dublin, because that's 3 of you vying for an audience that's barely there. I don't know how to get around that. All I know is what I do on stage. Off the stage, I haven't really a breeze what I'm doing comedy-wise or how things work. But I don't know what the solution is. Should we all try and club together and brand Dublin comedy? Give us all the same flashy logo that people will know? I don't know. I think it's like, are the general public aware that there's, improv in the Inter on a Monday? So I suppose that's not a great example because they've had quite a few years to build up a following. But, there are even gigs starting and finishing in Dublin I know nothing about. I'll hear about it months later and go, I must try and get a gig there. Oh, no, he pulled that 2 months ago. Oh, okay. And I don't know if... I know it's hard, particularly for new comedians, because the less audience there are and the less... I'll wrap this up soon. I'm probably coming to the 5. The less audience there are, the less clubs there are, and the less chances there are, particularly for new comedians, to get out there and try stuff. And even when you're getting out there and trying stuff, it's very hard to know if your stuff works when you're doing it to 8 people all the time. It's nice to play to 8 people when you could be playing to 100 people the next week. But and I suspect for a lot of the newer lads, it's all like 8 to 12 people, and that's no way to even test. I don't think if your stuff works. I don't know how to get around that either. I know a lot of the young guys will try and set up gigs, just so they have a space to do their stuff. But again, that's essentially a promoter that doesn't really know what he's doing yet. And I don't know how much of it is counterproductive to everything. I don't know how much of it is just a waste of time, I even had toyed with the idea of I was going to start a club on a Monday night in the Halfpenny there at the start of the year, purely because the room was going and they wanted somebody to run a gig. And it was coming up to about a month before, and I just went, should I just look at Temple Bar on a Monday night? There's fucking nobody. There's absolutely no point. I knew I could not pay a comedian, so I just couldn't bring myself to ask a comedian to play. And it's just... And I understand as well with the new guys, having to make the gigs free. And because you're all new, none of you are expecting to get paid. So from that point of view, that works. But, I don't know how any potential audiences are going to... what awareness they would have of any new gigs run by new guys, starring new guys, where nobody, there's no weight behind anyone. It's a funny, I don't know, it's a funny thing, but it's I just know at the minute that there's very little biting out there, unless you have something behind you like the advertising that the Lounge or Vodafone or Ivy Gardens have to fucking get people to come. We don't have that, so I don't know. It's I'll leave it at that. I think Twitter as well has an awful lot to do with killing what I would call internet listings. You know what I mean? Like if you try to put in somebody's name to see where they might be playing, the first fucking 40 pages are going to be Twitter entries. There just doesn't seem to be any sort of, apart from social media, there doesn't seem to be any other sort of internet presence in that respect. So I don't know. There are things that I suppose need to be discussed, but that's what we're here to do today. I'll leave it at that. I've gone over. That's not like me. It's very unprofessional. All right. Thank you. I need these back for tonight.
Thanks, Robbie. That's great. Thanks for kicking things off. So that was Robbie Bonham talking about the issue of the recession. I should say that a lot of the topics today are based on some of the responses to a survey that was carried out a few weeks ago online. Indicated that 78% of people who were polled felt that the economic recession itself was a great contribution towards why it's difficult to find and sustain an audience for live comedy. The reason I asked Robbie to speak on that in particular is because Robbie has been at the comedy long enough to remember, starting out in the Celtic Tiger days when there was a bit more of a presence there in terms of an audience. So does anybody here have any questions on any of that or any points to put to him? Go ahead. Maxine, I'll get a mic to you here.
So in the glory days, in around 2006, would there have been more clubs or fewer clubs? Were these ones that were getting good audiences in 2006?
There was at least the same amount of clubs.
Really?
Because you had obviously the Inter, the Halfpenny. I think the Bankers only started in 2004, I think. 5. The Laughter Lounge wasn't around as well. That probably helped. Regular gigs.
So
there was a lot of semi-regular things that we could sell out. Like Aidan, yourself, and Kieran McMahon would regularly run short runs of, up in Doyle's for a couple of months.
So it's not that they're spread thinner, or that there's these new ones popping up that aren't any good, that are putting people off, or.
New ones would pop up, 8-9 years ago, but there was enough of an audience where people would find their way into those as well as ours.
So everything was sort of equal. Really, the number of clubs, but just the audience has gone down. And the internet presence, I think entertainment.ie is quite a good internet presence, where that seems to list the ones that I know a lot of comedy goers go look on there. The ones that I get, the Wicked Wolf in Black Rock, I always say, where did you see it? And they often say entertainment.ie. So that's one place where you can go direct to it, and there's not a load of rubbish.
Well, say for instance, somebody's just Googling a comedian's name. And like years ago, the first 10 entries would be he's playing at such and such, or he's being interviewed by such and such, or there's a newspaper link or something like that. Whereas nowadays it's just reams and reams of Twitter, and you're just.
Thanks for that, Maxine. So that's a tip for anybody who's starting a club or continues to promote a club, that certainly Maxine finds that entertainment.ie is one place that some of the regulars might check out for news of a thing. Just on a point that Maxine made there, and I'll come to you next, Damon, in relation to how things were different maybe 9-10 years ago. Maxine mentioned was there more of a presence of clubs. Would you say that the numbers of comedians or those starting out in comedy at any rate at the moment are significantly larger than they would have been maybe 2004, 2005?
So probably no. There's been a lot of comedians in the last 5 or 6. And ever since, I do not mean this as a dig at anybody, but ever since Joy in the Hood, because there was this kind of anybody from anywhere can get up and do, and people are watching that going, yeah, I think I'll try that. And they've never had that fucking desire in them before, but people like that, you will kind of fade away again after a couple of months. But it's just, it got to a stage where so many people were doing it, and so many people like that didn't really research first what they were getting into, or hang out in clubs, or talk to people, and it's just that, there's been a lot more, and it compounds because there's more and more comedians, and then as kind of recession hit and less people are going out, you're just left with a load of comedians out there going, like I have to gig somewhere, and it's. You
can't fire a comedian. They're always going to be there, whether you like it or not. You're not their boss, so if they insist on staying on the comedy scene, they're always going to be there. I mean that in a nice way.
Until the chemical weapons start being used, and then it'll all change.
A lot more people, and then just with less clubs, it compounds itself. For instance, I'll just take the Laughter Lounge as an example, because I play there, and in pre-recession times, like 4 years ago, the Laughter Lounge had, I think, 3 venues, and we're opening up a 4th venue in Cork. And then, kind of in the last few years, what happened was the Belfast one got pulled because I think the centre it was in got sold or something, and then the Waterford one just died, and the Cork one never even took off because just the money dropped out of it. But what that essentially meant for Laughter Lounge comedians was that you now only had a quarter or a third of the gigs available. So comedians that would have played the Laughter Lounge every 2 months are now only doing it twice a year or 3 times a year. That's the only amount of work that's available. But I'm just giving you that as an example of a very tightly run unit. So I'm presuming that the general, whatever you want to call it, fringe scene or whatever, we're like a more spread out version of that. There's just nobody going to clubs, so there's less gigs, so there's less. But there's still, the amount of comedians is still growing. But I don't know. And I mean, that's something that was probably going to happen anyway. The amount of comedians was going to grow because it is something that is becoming more and more of an acceptable thing to try with your life. Even if a lot of people do comedy just to find their way to do something else they wanted to do. But it's just very harder nowadays with the lack of audiences because it's you know, I mean, I got to a stage where I remember last year where I'd say a third of, almost a half of every gig I had booked cancelled before it even happened, you know, and it's very. I got to the stage where, like, I'm just speaking for myself, but I would have gone from gigging 3 or 4 nights a week to gigging once a week at the most, and you're probably talking for about a quarter of the money you used to get, and it doesn't, when you're gigging a lot less, it doesn't really help your act either because you're not getting. Jesus, when I think back on 10 years ago, the amount of fucking stage time and practice we got that we took for granted, you know what I mean? It's yeah. So I don't know. It's just there's more comedians and there's less gigs and.
Okay, Damon, do you have a question? Yeah, could you come over here? I just would like to be close to you sometimes.
Hey everyone. Hey. No, I guess there's a few points there. In regards to what Maxine was saying about her talking to her audience and figuring out how they found out about where the gig is on. I don't seem to see that in a lot of I know Column's pretty in with TripAdvisor, but you know, you're saying the social media's changed things. Could it be that the places people go to on social media has changed? Like, yeah. I know in the UK a big thing is LinkedIn, which isn't really a thing here, but there's a lot of cultural meetups that people do through LinkedIn. Like, right. People who are a loose end because London is a lonely city and they feel sad, but no one's really engaged with LinkedIn here. That could be, like, the audiences are still there, but perhaps the people haven't engaged with them as much anymore. Colleges, the first week, like, there should be people actually at meeting the comedy socks and giving them free tickets to inspire people to join the comedy society or cheaper things like these. Like, in a way, like you were saying about 10 years ago, everyone took things for granted, and I think in a way people maybe have taken the audiences for granted as well. Like, they're still there, but the ways to engage them has potentially changed. I mean, I know you were saying before that Aidan used to do the angelic banana smackdown at Doyle's. No one's put on a gig in Doyle's since then. Yeah. It's right across the road from Trinity. Yeah. It's actually the easiest venue for them to get to. Aidan used to put on a smackdown where people could do 2, then 3, then 4 minutes. No one's really done that format since then, even though it's a proven way to get audiences in. No, don't get any ideas. You're out of the game. But, you know, I think I do agree with your points, but I think in a lot of ways that a lot of that kind of taken for granted is systemic. I think there are new ways to get people in, and perhaps just people haven't engaged with them.
The other thing as well about social media that I meant to say is that social media, particularly the likes of Twitter, it's almost come to the stage where that is becoming people's social lives almost. You know, people that might have gone out 3 nights a week, I'll just go out the 1 night a week, I'll just fuck about the internet the other 2 nights, and that's how we have the crack now.
I would say that every industry has to adapt to social media. It's not just comedy. It doesn't matter, like, you know, the internet killed HMV. If you want to run any kind of event, you have to be on top of social media. You have to be listed on everything. You have to stand out from the crowd. You can't afford to be behind on social media full stop. It is something that, you know, it's hard to be on top of, but it's a problem that every kind of industry is facing at the moment. Right? Like, there's companies that are closing down simply because they haven't realised that social media was something that was worth investing in and to get the product out there.